Jack went back to the same street that night. The boy was still there. Same corner, same silence, same small cup on the ground. Then a car stopped. An old sedan idled at the curb, headlights dim, engine low. A man stepped out, calm, ordinary, eyes constantly scanning the street, and Evan stood up immediately. No hesitation, no confusion, no resistance. He picked up the cup and climbed into the car as if this was part of his routine. The door closed. The sedan drove away. Jack stayed frozen where he was. That was the moment he knew something was wrong. If you saw a child leave like that, would you think it was normal? Or would you feel that same knot in your stomach? Tell us what you would think in the comments, and keep listening to find out what Jack did next. Snow had a way of making small towns look quieter than they really were. It softened the edges of buildings, dulled the noise of traffic, and turned sidewalks into pale ribbons of ice and dirt. The snow here was no longer white. It had been stepped on, driven over, mixed with exhaust and time. It clung to the edges of the road in gray, uneven piles, like something forgotten. Evan sat beside one of those piles. He was small for his age, too thin for the heavy winter coat he wore, the sleeves slightly too long, the zipper broken halfway up. His gloves didn't match, and neither fully covered his fingers. He kept his hands close together, as if trying to share warmth between them. He didn't call out. He didn't hold a sign. He didn't look up at people as they passed. Instead, Evan stared at the ground, watching boots and shoes move by. Some hurried, some slowed for a moment. Most didn't change pace at all. A small plastic cup sat beside him, resting on a flattened patch of snow. A few coins lay inside, copper and silver, dull and cold. When the wind blew, they clinked softly, a sound so faint it was almost lost beneath the shuffle of footsteps. People noticed him. They always did. Their eyes flicked toward him, then away. Sympathy crossed their faces briefly, like a passing shadow. A few dropped coins without stopping, their hands moving quickly, as if afraid of lingering too long. Pity, Evan had learned, was usually in a hurry. Across the street, an old motorcycle rolled slowly through the snow, its engine low and uneven. It wasn't loud, but it was different enough to draw attention. The bike looked as tired as the town itself. Scratched paint, rust along the edges, leather seat worn smooth from years of use. Jack Miller rode it with practiced ease. He had learned long ago how to keep steady on slick roads, how to feel the ice before it surprised him. Snow collected on his jacket and helmet, melting slowly against the heat of the engine and his body. He saw the boy before he meant to. Something about the stillness caught his eye. The way Evan sat so quietly while the world moved around him. No sign, no gesture, just waiting. Jack slowed. The motorcycle came to a stop a few feet away, tires crunching softly against packed snow. He cut the engine, and for a moment the street seemed even quieter. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills. Not much. Enough to feel helpful without feeling inconvenient. He stepped closer and placed the money into the cup. Evan looked up then. His eyes were large and dark, framed by lashes dusted with snowflakes. There was no smile, no surprise, just a calm, careful look, as if he were measuring something. Jack nodded once, an automatic gesture. He patted the boy lightly on the shoulder, unsure what else to do. Beside him, Rex, the old German shepherd who rarely left Jack's side, lowered his head. The dog stepped closer, sniffing Evan's hands with quiet interest. His tail wagged once, slow and gentle. Evan's fingers twitched. For the briefest moment, something like warmth crossed his face. Not happiness, not relief, just recognition, as if being seen mattered as much as the money itself. Jack straightened. He told himself this was enough. He had stopped. He had given. He had acknowledged the boy more than most people did. That had to count for something. Jack swung back onto the motorcycle. Rex jumped up behind him, settling into his familiar spot. The engine roared to life again, cutting through the cold air. As Jack pulled away, snow kicked up behind the tires, briefly obscuring the sidewalk. He didn't look back. At least, not right away. The road stretched ahead, lined with dim storefronts and streetlights that buzzed faintly in the cold. Snow continued to fall, slow and steady, covering tracks almost as soon as they were made. Jack rode on, but the image stayed with him. The boy's eyes, not pleading, not accusing, just watching. As the town slipped past, Jack felt something tighten in his chest. A familiar feeling, one he had learned to recognize but never quite learned to ignore. It was the question that always came afterward. Had he done enough? The money hadn't been much. The moment had been brief. He hadn't asked the boy's name, hadn't asked where his parents were, hadn't asked why a child was sitting alone in the snow. He told himself there were reasons. He wasn't a social worker. He wasn't the police. He couldn't save everyone. Still, the discomfort lingered. The motorcycle cut through the snowfall, engine humming beneath him. Rex leaned slightly against Jack's back, steady and warm. Jack adjusted his grip on the handlebars. Somewhere behind him, Evan was still sitting there, still watching people pass, still collecting coins that felt heavy in small hands. The snow would keep falling, and the town would keep moving. Jack rode on, carrying with him the uneasy weight of a kindness that felt unfinished. The town felt different at night, not quieter, just hollow. Snow still fell, but more slowly now, drifting instead of pressing down. The streetlights cast long yellow pools on the road, and everything beyond them dissolved into shadow. Stores were closed, windows dark. The few cars that passed did so without urgency, tires hissing softly against wet asphalt. Jack Miller rode back the same way he had come earlier that day. He told himself he was just passing through, that it made sense to take this route home, that there was nothing unusual about it, but the truth sat heavier than that. The boy. The image of Evan sitting by the curb had refused to leave Jack's thoughts. It lingered behind every mile, every turn of the handlebars. The stillness, the eyes, the way the snow had gathered around someone who didn't seem to belong there. Jack slowed as he approached the corner. Rex shifted behind him, alert now. The dog's ears lifted slightly, his body no longer relaxed. Jack felt it, through the seat, through the quiet tension in the way Rex leaned forward. Evan was still there. Same place, same posture. He sat beside the dirty mound of snow as if time had passed around him without permission. The cup was still at his side, though the coins inside were barely visible in the dark. His coat looked thinner now, less capable of holding back the cold. His head was bowed, but not asleep. Waiting. Jack pulled over across the street and cut the engine. The sudden silence pressed in on him. No voices, no laughter. Just the faint hum of a distant highway and the whisper of snow brushing the ground. Something felt wrong. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just off. Jack stayed where he was, helmet still on, hands resting on the handlebars. He didn't approach this time. He didn't reach for his wallet. He watched. Minutes passed. Evan didn't move. Cars drove by occasionally, headlights briefly washing over the sidewalk before disappearing again. None stopped. No coins fell. The cold deepened. Then, without warning, another car appeared. An old sedan turned the corner slowly, its headlights dimmer than they should have been. The paint was a dull gray, unremarkable in every way. It rolled to a stop near the curb, engine idling low, too quiet. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He wasn't large. He wasn't threatening at first glance. His clothes were clean, practical, dark jacket, jeans, boots suited for winter. He looked like someone who could disappear into a crowd without effort, but his eyes never stopped moving. They flicked down the street, then back again, scanning corners and windows. He stood for a moment, as if listening, measuring the silence. Jack felt his jaw tighten. Rex let out a low growl, barely audible but unmistakable. His body went rigid. The man, Caleb, turned toward Evan, and Evan stood up immediately. No hesitation, no confusion. The movement was quick, automatic, as if rehearsed. Evan brushed snow from his coat and stepped toward the car without looking back. He didn't glance at the cup, didn't gather the coins, didn't acknowledge the street he had occupied for hours. He walked straight to the open door. Caleb didn't grab him, didn't rush him. He simply waited, one hand resting on the door frame. Evan climbed into the passenger seat. The door closed. The sedan pulled away. Just like that, Jack sat frozen. The street returned to its quiet state, as if nothing had happened. Snow drifted down onto the spot where Evan had been sitting, already beginning to erase his presence. Rex growled again, louder this time. Jack's heart pounded, not fast, but heavy. That wasn't right. Children didn't move like that unless they were used to it, unless the action had been repeated enough times to strip it of uncertainty. Jack replayed the scene in his mind. No struggle, no words, no goodbye, just obedience, or something that looked like it. He felt a familiar surge of anger, sharp and unwelcome, not explosive, controlled, focused, the kind that came from recognizing a pattern you wished you didn't know so well. Jack had spent years learning to trust certain instincts. Riding had taught him that hesitation could get you killed, that ignoring subtle signs was a mistake you only made once. This was one of those signs. He started the motorcycle. The engine broke the silence abruptly. The sound echoed down the street, louder than he expected. For a brief second, Jack wondered if he had been seen, but the sedan was already gone. Jack pulled into traffic, following at a distance. Not close enough to be obvious, not far enough to lose them. The snow blurred the edges of the road, forcing him to slow. Street after street passed, each one looking the same under the streetlights. The sedan maintained a steady pace, never speeding, never hesitating, like it knew exactly where it was going. Rex stayed alert, head lifted, eyes fixed ahead. Jack didn't reach for his phone. Not yet. He needed to understand what he was seeing. The sedan turned into a residential area, then slowed near a block of older buildings. It didn't stop immediately. It rolled forward, then turned into a narrow side street and disappeared. Jack stopped at the corner. He didn't follow further. Not tonight. He shut off the engine and sat there, breathing fog into his helmet. Snow settled onto his shoulders, melting slowly. Something had changed. Earlier, he had ridden away believing he'd done a small good thing. A gesture, a moment of kindness. Now that moment felt hollow, insufficient. Evan hadn't needed coins. He had needed someone to stop and ask the right questions. Rex shifted, letting out a soft, uneasy sound. Jack reached back and rested a hand on the dog's neck, grounding himself. He knew that feeling, the one that said this wasn't over, the one that told him walking away again would be a mistake. Jack looked down the empty street where the boy had vanished. In the quiet aftermath, one thought settled firmly in his mind. Whatever was happening to that child, it wasn't something he could ignore anymore. Patterns revealed themselves to those who stayed long enough to watch. Jack stayed. In the days that followed, he adjusted his route without announcing it to himself. Each evening, as the light faded and the cold crept deeper into the streets, he passed the same corner. Sometimes he slowed. Sometimes he stopped across the road. Sometimes he circled the block and returned. The result was always the same. Evan appeared at exactly the same time. Not early, not late. As if summoned by an invisible clock, the boy would emerge from between two buildings just as the streetlights flickered on. He wore the same coat, the same gloves, the same guarded stillness. He sat in the same spot beside the curb, setting the same plastic cup on the ground. No hesitation, no wandering. Routine, precise, and unforgiving. Jack began to notice the details. Evan never shifted his position. He didn't stretch his legs, didn't look around unless someone stopped. His gaze remained fixed on the ground, always, slightly ahead of his shoes, as if he had learned that looking too far up invited trouble. People passed, coins fell, pity arrived and left in a hurry, and Evan remained. Each night, as the temperature dropped and the street grew quieter, Jack waited for the next part. Caleb never came early. He arrived when the traffic thinned and the sidewalks emptied. The same sedan rolled in without headlights blazing, engine quiet, movements deliberate. Caleb stepped out with the same measured pace, scanning the street not like a man afraid, but like one checking ownership. Jack learned the difference. Caleb did not ask. He signaled. A tilt of the head, a small movement of his hand. Evan responded instantly. The boy stood, collected the cup, and walked to the car. His shoulders slumped just enough to suggest exhaustion, not fear. This was not a rescue. It was retrieval. Jack watched the exchange closely. Caleb took the cup and turned it upside down into his own hand, the coins spilling out with a soft, metallic sound. He counted quickly, efficiently, his fingers moving without hesitation. When he finished, he slipped the money into his pocket. Evan received nothing, not a coin, not a nod, not a word. Caleb returned the empty cup to the boy, then opened the car door. Evan climbed in. Every time. Jack's chest tightened with each repetition. The first night, he had told himself it might be temporary, that maybe Evan was helping family, that there could be a reason that didn't feel so wrong. The second night, that story collapsed. By the third, the truth had settled in, heavy and undeniable. This wasn't poverty. It was structure. Evan wasn't a child down on his luck. He was labor. Jack felt it in the way the boy moved, economical, practiced, stripped of hesitation. This was what happens when someone's survival depends on compliance. Rex sensed it too. Each night, when Caleb appeared, the dog's posture changed. His muscles tightened, his ears flattened. A low growl vibrated in his chest, restrained only by years of training and trust. Animals didn't rationalize. They recognized threat for what it was. Jack gripped the handlebars harder, knuckles whitening inside his gloves. He wanted to step in, wanted to shout, to confront, to break the pattern. But patterns didn't break easily. Jack knew that acting without understanding could make things worse. Caleb was careful, observant. He knew when eyes were on him. And more importantly, he knew when they weren't. Intervening without proof would only send Evan deeper underground. Still, doing nothing felt like betrayal. Jack replayed the moment he had dropped money into the cup days earlier. He remembered the way Evan had looked at him, not grateful, not hopeful, just attentive, as if evaluating whether Jack was safe or useful. The realization made Jack sick. Every coin he had given had gone straight into Caleb's pocket. Every act of kindness had fed the machine that kept Evan trapped. Jack understood now. If he kept giving, he was participating. If he stayed silent, He was complicit. There was no clean choice left. On the 5th night, Jack noticed something new. Caleb lingered longer. He leaned down close to Evan, speaking too softly to hear. Evan stiffened slightly, his hands clenching around the empty cup. Caleb straightened and glanced up the street, his eyes passing briefly over Jack's position. For a fraction of a second, their gazes met. Caleb didn't react. He didn't frown or smirk. He simply looked away, as if Jack were nothing more than a passing detail. The dismissal felt deliberate, a warning wrapped in indifference. Jack swallowed hard. Caleb wasn't reckless. He was confident. Confident that no one would interfere. Confident that the system worked in his favor. Confident that people like Jack would feel uncomfortable and then move on. That night, when the sedan disappeared into the darkness, Jack didn't follow. He went home instead. Sleep didn't come easily. Images replayed in his mind, the empty cup, the practiced movements, the way Evan vanished without a trace. Jack lay awake, listening to Rex's steady breathing, feeling the weight of a responsibility he hadn't asked for but couldn't deny. By morning, the question was no longer whether something was wrong. It was what he was willing to do about it. Because now Jack knew the truth. And once you saw the routine for what it was, pretending not to see became its own kind of cruelty. Snow fell harder that afternoon. Not the gentle kind that drifted and disappeared, but thick flakes that clung to coats and hair, weighing down the air. The sky hung low and gray, pressing against the town as if trying to trap it beneath a lid. Jack arrived early. Too early. He parked across the street and shut off the motorcycle, watching the corner from behind the fogged visor of his helmet. Rex sat alert behind him, muscles tight, tail still. Evan appeared right on time. The boy emerged from between the same two buildings, head down, shoulders drawn inward against the cold. He carried the cup and placed it in the same spot beside the curb. He sat. He waited. Everything followed the routine. Except Jack. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick fold of bills, more money than he had ever given a stranger at once. Enough to matter. Enough to break the pattern. He crossed the street and stopped in front of Evan. The boy looked up. Jack placed the money into the cup. The bills filled it completely. For a moment, Evan didn't move. His eyes widened, not with joy, not with relief, but with something closer to panic. His breathing quickened. His hands hovered uncertainly over the cup, as if touching it might trigger something terrible. This wasn't a gift. It was a disruption. Evan's gaze flicked past Jack, scanning the street with sudden urgency. His body stiffened, like a prey animal sensing danger. Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow. Across the street, a sedan idled. Caleb sat inside, watching. He didn't smile. He didn't react with surprise or pleasure. His eyes narrowed slightly, calculating, measuring the situation like a problem that required adjustment, not emotion. Jack stepped away slowly, returning to his bike. Rex's ears flattened, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Time stretched. Caleb waited longer than usual, long enough for the street to empty further, long enough for the tension to thicken. Then the sedan pulled up. Caleb stepped out, boots crunching against the snow. His gaze locked onto the cup immediately. He didn't look at Jack, didn't acknowledge him at all. Evan stood before being told. He picked up the cup with shaking hands. Caleb approached, his movements calm, controlled. He reached out. And in that instant, Rex lunged. The German shepherd burst forward with explosive speed, snapping the strap of the cup between his teeth. Coins and bills spilled briefly into the air before Rex clamped down and bolted. The street erupted into motion. Evan cried out, startled, taking an instinctive step back. Caleb did not shout. That was the most chilling part. His voice, low and sharp, cut through the chaos with precision. A command. Evan froze, then ran, not after Rex, toward him. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs as Rex disappeared into a narrow alley between two buildings, snow piling thick and undisturbed. Evan followed, slipping slightly, breath coming fast. Caleb walked, after them. Unhurried. Certain. Jack swung onto the motorcycle and followed, engine roaring to life. He skidded to a stop at the mouth of the alley, snow spraying up around the tires. The alley was tight and dim, the walls closing in. Snow-muffled sound, swallowing echoes. Rex stood at the far end, back bristling, teeth bared, growling low. The cup lay at his feet. Evan stood frozen halfway down the alley, trembling violently. His eyes darted between the dog and the man behind him. Caleb entered the alley last. He closed the distance slowly, deliberately, boots crunching with each step. His voice remained calm, almost bored. He spoke to Evan. Jack couldn't hear the words, but he saw the effect. Evan's shoulders collapsed inward. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Tears welled in his eyes, spilling over without sound. Caleb gestured toward Rex. Evan shook his head frantically. Caleb's jaw tightened. He stepped forward and shoved Evan hard. The boy stumbled, nearly falling, into the snow just feet from Rex. The growl deepened. Rex lowered his body, ready to spring, but he didn't move. Jack shouted then. His voice echoed harshly down the alley, breaking the stillness. He jumped off the bike and ran forward, boots slipping as he closed the distance. Caleb turned slowly. For the first time, his mask cracked. His eyes were flat, cold, annoyed. This wasn't anger. It was exposure. Jack placed himself between Evan and Caleb, one hand raised slightly, the other clenched. Rex moved to Jack's side, standing tall, silent now but watchful. Caleb studied them. Then he smiled, not wide, not friendly, a thin, humorless curve of the lips. He spoke quietly, as if sharing a private thought. Jack didn't respond. The alley seemed to shrink around them. Snow fell harder, blurring the edges of the world. Caleb took a step back, then another. He didn't run. He didn't threaten. He simply retreated, eyes never leaving Evan. A promise lingered in his gaze. This wasn't over. Caleb turned and walked out of the alley, disappearing back toward the street without looking back. Silence followed. Evan collapsed to his knees, sobbing now, body shaking with the release of terror he had been holding for too long. Jack knelt beside him, careful, slow. Rex lowered his head, sniffing Evan gently, tail wagging once. Jack wrapped his jacket around the boy's shoulders. The routine was broken, but the trap had revealed itself. And Jack knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Caleb had shown his true nature. And men like him didn't forgive interference. They adapted. Silence arrived slowly. Not all at once, but in layers, after the shouting stopped, after the footsteps faded, after the sound of the city retreated to something distant and unimportant. Snow continued to fall, thick and heavy, absorbing what little noise remained. Rex stood his ground. His body was rigid, muscles coiled, teeth still visible beneath curled lips. He placed himself between Evan and the space where Caleb had stood only moments earlier. The alley felt too small for the tension it held, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Caleb watched the dog carefully. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. Rex took a step forward. Just one. That was enough. Caleb bent down sharply, snatched the fallen cup from the snow, and backed away. The money was still inside, creased bills damp from melting snow. He clutched it without checking, without counting. His eyes flicked once toward Evan, then dismissed him entirely. There was no threat, no warning, no final, "Look." Caleb turned and ran. His boots slipped once, then found purchase. He disappeared out of the alley and into the street beyond, swallowed by the snowfall. He didn't slow. He didn't look back. He didn't care. Not whether Evan followed. Not whether the boy was hurt. Not whether he was alive. The moment the threat vanished, Rex changed. The growl stopped. His body relaxed as if a switch had been flipped. His ears lifted, tail lowering into a slow, cautious wag. He turned toward Evan, head tilted, curiosity replacing aggression. Evan flinched at first. His body was still locked in fear, breath coming in short, uneven gasps. His hands trembled uncontrollably, fingers stiff from cold and shock. He didn't move away, but he didn't move closer either. Rex approached slowly, deliberately, lowering himself until he was no taller than the boy's knees. He sniffed the air, then nudged Evan's sleeve gently with his nose. Warm. Alive. Safe. Evan let out a shaky breath. His shoulders sagged, the tension draining out of him all at once. He sank down into the snow, knees giving way beneath him, exhaustion finally claiming what fear had been holding upright. That was when Jack reached them. He came from the far end of the alley, footsteps careful, controlled. He took in the scene in a single glance, the empty space where Caleb had stood, the discarded cup, the boy crumpled in the snow. Jack shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over Evan's shoulders. The fabric was heavy, still warm from his body. Evan stiffened at the contact, then slowly relaxed. He pulled the jacket tighter around himself, burying his face briefly into the collar. The smell of leather and cold air filled his senses, grounding, real. Jack crouched beside him. He placed one hand on Evan's shoulder, not gripping, not restraining, just there. The pressure was light but steady, a silent signal that the world had not disappeared, that someone was still present. They didn't speak. There was nothing to explain, nothing to promise. Words would have felt too fragile for what had just happened, too small. Rex sat down beside them, close enough that Evan could feel the warmth of his body through the layers of clothing. Snow gathered on the dog's back, melting slowly. The alley no longer felt threatening, just empty. Jack waited until Evan's breathing slowed, until the shaking subsided into something manageable. When the boy finally looked up, his eyes were red and swollen, but clearer now. There was no gratitude in them, no relief, only something deeper, trust, tentative and unfamiliar. Jack nodded once. That was all. They left the alley together. Jack walked slightly ahead, his pace unhurried but firm. Evan followed, wrapped in the jacket, Rex keeping close to his side. Snow continued to fall, erasing their footprints almost as soon as they were made. They didn't return to the corner. They didn't look back. The streets swallowed them quietly. No one saw where they went. No reports were filed that night. No sirens cut through the snowfall. The town slept on, unaware that something had shifted beneath its notice. Days passed. The snow melted and returned again, cycling through the dull gray of winter. People continued to walk past the corner where Evan had once sat. But the corner was empty. No boy, no cup, no quiet figure waiting in the cold. Some noticed, most didn't. Life adjusted, as it always did, to the absence of something it had never truly acknowledged. And that was the strange comfort of it. Not every rescue needed witnesses. Not every ending required explanation. Sometimes, the most important things happened in silence, between people who understood without speaking, who chose action over attention. What happened to Evan after that night was never written down. There were no headlines, no interviews. Only a quiet certainty carried by one man and his dog, riding through falling snow with a boy who no longer had to sit alone. And on that corner, long after the last trace of footprints disappeared, the cold no longer had anyone left to claim.